everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Andre Solomon, a flutist with a classical background, a dabbler in jazz, and a passionate advocate for exploring musical versatility and creativity. I also serve as the community knowledge manager at Creative Generation, a values-forward global collective that empowers young creatives to make positive change in pursuit of a more just world. So today I am thrilled to be speaking with Alonso, a multi-talented composer, performer, music director, orchestrator, and educator. Alonso is a brilliant mind behind the Sonata for Flute and Piano, which I have the honor of performing as one of the winners of the adult amateur competition in the National Flute Association's virtual fall series. Alonso's compositions deeply resonated with my own aspirations as it provides a platform for representation, infuses a passion for ethnomusicology, utilizes arts administration expertise, encourages creative outputs through blogs and podcasts and interviews just like this one, and embraces the power of collaboration. So I am incredibly excited to learn more about Alonso's journey and the creative process behind this inspiring piece. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alonso.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Really, it's a pleasure. I feel very grateful even for you doing this. So again, many thank yous and also a belated happy birthday.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
Um, we could just go into it. But my first question here for you today is what initially sparked your passion for music, and when did you realize you wanted to pursue a career in composition and performance?
So, very good question. I think pretty much since I was like a little kid, I've always wanted to be like an artist of some form. Like I didn't start off doing music. I started doing more like visual art. I wanted to be like an animator. I wanted to be like a sketch artist. I wanted to be like a director, for example. And then once I started taking music lessons, that sort of just like shifted over a little bit. Like I still wanted to do some kind of artistry, but I think there is just something with doing music in like the public education sphere where there was like a way to build like community around it, which was really nice and I think sustainable in that kind of way. Being able to get together with other people and make music was really important for me wanting to just continue to do that, to be able to meet new people and have people perform my music and performing other people's music and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you 100%. It's nice to play alone, but I think more and more like playing with other people and doing things with other people is more special.
Yeah, for sure. Like I didn't make any friends through drawing, really. I would just do it like on my own. I would just draw like, like TV characters or whatever. But yeah, music really, and composing specifically, I mean, that's something that I do a lot like on my own. But then taking that and showing it to other people is a really special part of the process as well.
Yeah, it's a piece of you, a gift. So,
Mhm.
it's vulnerable at the same time,
Yeah, for real.
Well, thank you. As we speak about being a composer, performer, the music director, all of the titles that you wear many hats in the music industry. And so, how do all these roles contribute to your creative process and enrich your approach to composing?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the like most enriching of all of these hats, other than composing, I would say performing and orchestrating. I think there's something, especially about performing. I think it's because like I don't really like dance much in my life. There's like being able to get the music like in my body is something that is just a really nice aspect of music that I feel like kind of getting these emotions into my body kind of transfers into me wanting to it influencing like whatever I'm playing. I feel like generally if I'm playing through like a musical or if I'm doing some kind of solo piano piece or if I'm singing something with some people, just like having that kind of like physicality of it it's something that I keep going back to, I think, because I just like practice things and these motions over and over again. And I feel like those kind of add to my palette of expression that I could then put together in my own compositional process. And I think aside from that, there's also orchestrating. And so I feel like orchestrating is kind of like a bridge between using my performer self, my composing self, and also my like visual artist self a little bit when I was younger. Like it feels very much like you've got like a coloring book that you're trying to fill, yeah, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of like painting with performers, I guess. So that's another really fun process for me as well that I really enjoy aside from composing.
Yeah. I can only imagine it's kind of like in a way, at least the last part that you talked about, like chess too. It's like
Mm,
strategic and creative and like knowing all of your surroundings just to like do the best possible moves, I guess, that you can.
yeah, chess. That's an interesting way to think about it. I feel like one of my later answers kind of touches on that a little bit, but
Okay.
that's a good, I like that.
Or the dance too. I love dancing. So it's like I'm
Mm.
thinking about those, those little like step
So like two step.
diagrams. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So well, um continuing on a little bit of the, all of the hats you wear, you play many instruments and you just, as you said, sing. And so specifically as a performer, how do
Mm.
you think that informs your choices as a composer? And then, it can be really hard to balance all of those things. So how do you balance between being a performer and a composer? Yeah.
Yeah, I think striking a balance can be really difficult. Like, I don't really have like a mathematically like calculated like ratio of what I want to be doing. And
Yeah.
sometimes it changes too, just depending on like if I've listened to something that really inspires me to want to like do something like that. I think like nowadays I'm a little bit more picky about the kind of stuff that I perform. Um, I think especially since composing has been taking off more so than it has. I think more so now than it like ever has. Um, I am getting a larger amount of composing work, and I think being in that privileged position makes me able to be a little bit more particular about the kind of stuff that I perform. Um, I think like honestly nowadays I don't perform really much classical music. Like I do a lot of like kind of like pop, R&B, jazz, kind of like sometimes even like free jam kind of music. And I feel like I was saying earlier about the kind of the motions and the physicality of performing, like influencing my own compositional decisions. I feel like that's part of why I mix together so many genres is because as a performer, I think that's kind of what I was doing first. And then composing, it kind of just came out of that.
Yeah. I as an arts administrator and then trying to play the flute, it can be so hard to find the balance and what's the balance. And then
Mhm.
you could be like, oh, I'm not musician enough, or for you, composer enough, if you're not doing, the comparison game. And then I think too, it's like, um, as you mentioned, like with boundary, with age, with experience, like
It's
how
true.
good it feels to do what you really want to do. Even though everything is an opportunity, but not every opportunity has to be or is for you. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I just feel like
Yeah.
it's growing into like who you want to be.
For real. And it takes a lot of trial and error, I feel like.
Yeah,
Um, especially like me being in my 20s, like I
same.
back in 2021, I did like it was like a 3 month long contract with the main theater company in Los Angeles, Center Theater Group. We
Okay.
put on a production of A Christmas Carol, and we toured for about a month. And then we were in LA for a month, and then before the tour, we were rehearsing for a month. And the schedule for those things is so brutal. It's like 6 days a week, like
Yeah.
48 hours a week, and you basically don't have time to do anything else. Like, it's really advisable. If I could do it again, I would just sleep literally all the time on my time off and not try to attempt to do any other kind of like project at all. But I didn't know. I thought I could do it all. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll just mix in some other projects with this. And I was like, I quickly realized that wasn't sustainable at all.
Yeah.
And I realized that like that kind of Broadway musician life isn't really for me because I like to be able to do my own creative stuff outside of that. And I can't be that physically and mentally exhausted to not be able to do that. So that was one of the trial and error things I had to figure out for myself.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. It's like growing pains.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's like it's a great opportunity for someone who like really, really wants to do that. I'll give that to them. I don't need it. Yeah.
Same. Um, well, you mentioned a little bit about infusing multiple parts of yourself, and as your bio says, multiple genres that you're interested in, things that
Hmm.
bring you joy, spark joy. And so, as a composer with the diverse musical background, like you said, encompassing jazz and R&B and Afro-Cuban and funk and hip hop. Your abilities to infuse these have been praised. We had a rehearsal yesterday, and the pianist was like, "Oh, I'm hearing all the jazz like in here." He's like started to improv, and so
Oh,
uh,
cool.
I'm just really interested. Like, could you share some of your insights in that creative process when composing for different projects, and how do you navigate all of the blending with all these musical traditions, maintaining authenticity and respect for each of them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing that came to mind was so this composer who I'm assisting, who's also like a mentor of mine. We both went to UCLA. We're both like Black folks. His name's Marcus Norris. And
Okay.
I asked him a question about this in terms of just like, well, the question was a little bit different, but it gets at what you're getting at is like, what do you tell people your style of music is if they just like ask you?
Yeah.
Because I feel like as a creative, I think, and a lot of creatives I feel like struggle with this kind of thing. But what he says is like genre is for the listener.
Mm,
And so, like, as I'm creating, I'm trying not to think too much about these individual styles and kind of the boxes that they're in. But there's also like a consideration that I need to have because I'm eventually going to share this with people who may be you know of these traditions that I'm drawing from and have associations with them and doing that kind of thing. I think what makes this kind of navigation I think fairly easy for me is I try to stick with like musical practices that I feel like I have some kind of like claim to through my heritage. And so I feel like one thing that makes that really easy is I'm like a mixed race person. Like my mom's from Kenya. I'm a Black person being raised in America. I've also got some like French and Spanish, like on my dad's side. And so I feel like there are just like so many different types of music, especially with like Black people, where we just like innovate so much and do so much that I feel like there's so much that I can connect to and kind of play with that feels which is really nice. And it feels I guess like the most in terms of paying respect to these styles, I feel like that's the most like ethical way that I feel like doing it
yeah.
is taking influence from yeah, taking influence from styles of music like from like Black people and African diaspora. I feel like in terms of like giving respect to the styles that I um, am like taking from, I think that can come in different forms. I think one of them that I've been trying to do more, I need to get better about like writing program notes for my pieces, but I'm starting to do it more and more.
Yeah.
is just acknowledging what direct kind of influences went into making it within the program notes to give people something to listen to. And I think just doing like a good amount of like research on the styles of music that you're taking from as well is important. I think that that issue comes up a lot. I think with film scoring, especially because so many film composers are also like white, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of different like regions of the world you might need to draw inspirations from. And there's, it's like how much research do you put in and how authentic do you want it to be, but how much do you want it to be your own thing? And it's there's a line to tread, and I feel like it takes some research and self-awareness and just all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Um, as a biracial person, two things I wanted to like touch on is it's like how I am really coming mostly classically trained, mostly playing pieces by white dead composers. Old, yeah, dead means old. It's
Mm.
interesting because I feel like I'm in this space, and there's this really good book by Dr. Tatum Bailey. I hope I'm getting her name right. Um, about how people identify, and like for me, like I am white and black, biracial, also something else too at the same time, and it's I think as we talk about these growing pains and getting older, like again, figuring out who we are, how we want to present that, and staying affirmed in that can be like this vulnerable, it's courageous, it's especially with fan culture, stand culture, like how do you not let audience and viewers get the best of you? And so, one,
Mm.
it's a journey. And then my other point too of like research, like even with this piece alone for you, like when does research stop? How far do you go? When we're juggling all the things, like
Mm.
how do you do everything and be? And I kind of have been told a lot is like putting the effort and trying your best, and not in a way like, you know, there are so many multitudes of trying your best, but like I, in terms of research or program notes and all these things, is like, how do we find something that does justice, but also isn't like overwhelming us or, with all the things that we have to do to just like be a human.
No, for sure. I mean, I think even just like the fact that we are taking these things into consideration and having these discussions at all shows that we're doing better than a lot of composers probably are. I
Yeah.
think having that kind of like idea of perfectionism can kind of get in the way of just like realizing that like you're already doing great by just like thinking about it at all. Like that will definitely guide you, in your journey for respect and authenticity and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Heard. Um, well, kind of keeping going on a little bit of the praising that I've heard from other people about you. It also said that your expertise in music transcription and arranging is very praised. And so, how does your experience in these areas inform your original compositions? Again, we kind of talked about um, different genres, different cultures, different all of this. And so,
Mm.
how again do you strike this balance between preserving the essence of the source material while again infusing your own unique artistic touch?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, especially with like classical musicians, I think, especially as someone who I think when I got to classical music school felt like a little bit like I didn't like fully fit in terms of like I feel like a lot of classical musicians can be very like myopic in terms of their focus and really not venture outside of um just classical music and those kinds of like the different values of different styles of music. Like for example, like I really like I play drum set. I'm a very like rhythmically
Okay.
oriented person in my playing style and my composing and that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, the first example I have is not from like it's not from an original piece that I wrote, but it is for something that I transcribed and arranged for a project. So there's this group called the Kings of Soul and Swing that I've music directed for, and they've had these like orchestral concerts. It's these like two guys, and one of them's he's the swing king, and the other guy's the soul king. And so the guy who's the king of soul, his name's Julius Thomas III. He does like Broadway and a lot of, old school R&B. And so we did this like Jackson 5 medley.
Okay.
And so I grew up with a lot of that music. Like my mom was obsessed with the Jackson 5, growing up as a kid, and she showed me that music and a lot of the old Motown stuff. So it was for orchestra, right? Orchestra and like rhythm section that had some saxes. And so when you listen to like a lot of these older Motown recordings, like you have like strings, you have like a horn section, you have the rhythm section, but a lot of these people that they're hiring were like, well, actually, I don't know, but I'm assuming that they're like Motown musicians and people who like play within these idioms a lot of like jazz and, just like beat driven stuff. And so when you're taking that kind of thing and you're taking it to orchestra and trying to figure out the different kinds of traditions that different people are coming from, I come into an issue of like, okay, so there's this like cool syncopated horn line that's coming in. And by horn, I mean just like, trumpets, trombones, saxes, like that kind of horn section. If I want to thicken up the section, do I bring in the French horn players? Because I feel like the trumpet players and the trombone players and the sax players have probably done some amount of jazz or big band work like in their life. But the way that we often group brass together, there's also French horn players. And I feel like they're not as likely to have had that kind of experience just because the instrument hasn't historically been used in that way.
Yeah.
So it's a question of, do I add them to this line, or do I leave it to people who I feel like may be able to do this more convincingly?
Yeah.
And so that kind of orchestration, not only based off of like an instrument's function, like can they play sustain notes, can they play very mellow tones, but just in terms of like, how has this instrument existed, like what other canons has this instrument existed inside of, and what is the player of that instrument more likely be able to be, what kinds of ways are they able to like think and interact with music, is something that I've had to figure out with my own personal compositions as well. I think just being able to delegate certain tasks to within like an orchestra or any chamber ensemble to like who can do the rhythms, who can do like the supporting chords, like that kind of thing. How do we divide it up in a way that is able to bridge these different traditions? And so I think a lot of it, so there's a lot of assuming work that can be done, especially if you're writing for people like you don't know. But I think also just like finding players that you know and can do these kinds of things is also really important to be able to have your music played like effectively. And so like I know composers that like we'll talk about later, like this guy Marcus, I know he built his own orchestra to be able to do the kinds of things he wants to do musically, is find the players that he feels like can do these things. So yeah.
Yeah. I had a gig the other day and one of the musicians was like, I identify as classical musician, and he's like, sometimes classical musicians just can't listen like the way like a jazz person can, or the improv. I have many friends who like are very scared, and I get scared too because again, it can be, if you don't know the chords, if you don't have the lead sheet, you really gotta like leave it to your ears and hear you 100% on like what is the musician's background in your collaboration.
Yeah. No, it's really I don't know. It's just there's a huge range of like what people are able to do with music, and it's cool to be able to write to people's strengths in that way as well. Like if I'm getting a commission, like being able to know that background. Is that person an improviser? Should I ask them to do this? Do they what kind of things have they studied like I'm going to be writing a commission soon for someone who studied a lot of like flute traditions of like Latin America and the Caribbean.
Oh,
And so
cool.
I'm excited to be able to take that knowledge and write something that plays to those kinds of strengths and styles and rhythms and certain things like that. So yeah, knowing is key.
I mean,
For
you're the
sure.
CEO, so we
Yeah,
all
for sure.
um well, I know I've been kind of like deep, which I appreciate, deep into kind of like how you do it and how you compose and kind of those aspects. But um, you know, you've worked on film scores and other projects, and just kind of interested, like what specific genre or type of film like sparks the most joy for you and why?
That is a good question. And I think, like, okay, so I was actually just having a conversation about this with someone a few days ago in terms of like the kinds of genres that made me want to get into film scoring, the kinds of genres that I've found that I'm good at, and the kinds of genres that like I enjoy writing for the most are not all the same. I mean, I like to, okay, well, let me get into it. So, when I was in high school and I was getting into, I mean, the first score really that like made me want to get into film scoring was the Pixar film The Incredibles.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, just that big band jazz sound is I just love it so much. And that with the orchestra and everything. And I remember I was like, age reveal. I was 7 years old when I was watching the film, and I was staying through the credits like a total nerd, like in the in the theater. And I was like, I saw like music by Michael Giacchino, and I was like, oh my God, that's someone's job. I just started taking piano lessons. I was like, whoa, hold on a second. So, and throughout, I think stuff like more like lighthearted animation, kind of like Pixar films, that kind of general world was something that I was interested in for a while and inspired me to want to become a film composer.
Yeah.
I think what has challenged me as I've started to grow and become older and collaborate with people who like just work with more like intense topics is like just this year I've scored a scene of like a police brutality scene as well as like a scene that it was like a public like shooting. Um, and what I found one is that I'm like pretty good at it, weirdly, like invoking fear into the hearts of audiences. Like not something I thought I would want to do. And when I was going in college, I was like, oh yeah, I just want to write like, pretty music. I don't know. I don't want to do all this like atonal scary stuff. But no, it's kind of fun in like a weird way. But so that's been interesting. So I've been able to kind of like, I think I would want to one day do some kind of like horror film, maybe just to see what it's like. But I think in terms of like what I really enjoy, I think like kind of fantasy and like comedy are two genres that I think I enjoy doing. I
Yeah.
enjoy it. And I think I'm good at it too. But I was just surprised to find out about the about the scary stuff. That was interesting.
Maybe you'll step into like the Nope and um
Oh yeah, dude, like Michael Abels
yeah,
type stuff.
because he just
Yeah.
wrote the
Omar?
yes, and they like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw it live. One of my friends
Oh wow.
was in it. And that was really amazing. I mean, I've been a fan of like Rhiannon Giddens for a while, and I've been a fan of Michael Abels for a while, and the way they just like came together to collaborate was really beautiful. So yeah, I'm not a huge like opera person. So it was the first opera I'd seen in like years and years, but no, it was really cool. He's doing really cool stuff.
Yeah, there's just I including yourself, they're just like so there's just so many people out there, and I've kind of been in a maybe it's my researcher coming to be, but like
Mhm.
following people and investigating people, and it's just like people bring in thinking about genres, people bring a lot to the table in terms of their like artistry.
Totally. Totally. And there, yeah, there's so many people out there doing really cool stuff. And I feel like I've only heard about it now that I'm like done with my schooling.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, wait a minute, all this cool stuff's going on, and none of you guys were talking about it. So I don't
Yeah,
know. It's cool being, it takes some effort sometimes.
it does.
Um,
That could be a whole like 5 hours conversation about the musical training for sure.
yeah, for real.
Well, and even thinking about all these inspirational people, do you have any memorable experiences or lessons from people that you've collaborated with, who possibly, and I assume, influence your approach to music?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are a couple instances that come to mind. So in terms of like performers I've worked with, one of the most amazing performers that I've worked with was in the I mentioned working on the production of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Alex Newell, who was just, I believe, the first non-binary person to be awarded a
Yeah.
Tony for what was it, lead actor or something, some lead actor in a musical featured. I forget the exact category, but made Tony and Broadway history.
Yeah.
Um, they were our ghost of Christmas present for A Christmas Carol.
Okay.
And so there are a few moments where we're working, like me and Remy were the music directors, where we would ask them like, oh, can you do something more like in this style? Can you make it a little bit more classical, like add some kind of weight or anything? And every time we asked for something, what Alex would say is like, I can literally do anything you want. Like
Okay.
I can do anything, like with such like confidence in their own ability. That was really amazing to see. I think the way that like I exude confidence and the way that Alex exudes confidence are like polar opposites. Like I'm much more of a quietly confident person. They're much more of an outwardly boastfully confident person. But just seeing that like confidence in their own ability, um, I think really impacted me in just in terms of how I show up to like my own composing and collaborating on like film scores. I think part of my multiple genre-ness and like my breadth of styles and stuff like that, I think are one of the strengths I have, especially with film scoring. And I think being able to really like sit with that and be like, oh, we don't need to totally change up the style of the scene, or this thing is drawing from all these different things. Like I'm your guy. Like that this is why you're hiring me. So just like being realizing that there's that I should be confident in my own ability. And then another musician, this is actually one of my professors at
Okay.
UCLA, Richard Daniel Poor. He was the head of composition for the last 2 years I was there. And he wrote this piece called The Passion of Yeshua,
Okay.
which I was in the UCLA Chamber Singers for, and we went to Buffalo to record it and won a Grammy for Best Choral
Say the
Performance. So
grand.
that was its own awesome thing. But aside from that, I took a class from him called orchestral scoring. And so it didn't have anything to do with film scoring. It was just about like writing for orchestra. And so he has this way of like teaching and talking where he'll go off into these tangents of these like really grandiose, like romanticized stories of all these old composers. And there's usually some nuggets of wisdom you get from there. But I think the biggest nugget of wisdom I got from him, we'd done a reading of a piece. We each wrote like a 3-minute piece, and we had a reading of it with the UCLA Philharmonic. And afterwards, he was talking to us about like what we could have done differently, what our strengths are, that kind of thing. And so what he had told me is that I had enough ideas within my 3-minute piece for like an entire symphony.
Okay.
I was like, well, but I had like 3 ideas there. And he was like, yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, like, like my mind was kind of blown in that moment. Like, oh, you really don't need that, like that much. You can really take from just like 3 very general things and really just spend so much time developing those things instead of trying to cram so many ideas in it. I think what he kind of had me realize is like the larger works are, often like the more simple they become. So when we were writing for orchestra, we did a lot of reductions for like piano and that kind of thing. And it was like, you're going to realize like you think orchestra is really complex, but when you see how these people write for it, it's like very simple. There's like this pad layer, and then there's the bass layer, and then the melody, and then maybe something else. And it's like there's like not that much going on, because of the way the way it's structured. So that was just kind of interesting, thinking of how simple you should make things that feel so grand. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a professor once because I used to be that person because writing isn't, luckily I can write, but I wouldn't say it's my forte. And one professor like took me aside once, was like, stop being so complicated and like just tell me like what do you want to present and your ideas. And it
Mm.
it's yeah, it's like, not, is it simplicity is key, but like yeah, yeah.
Keep it simple for success.
Yeah, yeah. And you can
Yeah.
build on that.
Yeah. I think there's something also of like, especially when we're at UCLA, there aren't too many like opportunities to hear your music performed by like an orchestra. So I think there's something of like when you get the opportunity, at least the way I approach it is I just wanted to hear as many things as I wanted to be like tried out for my own learning experience, which was something too. So I feel like maybe if I'd written the 3 minute piece for orchestra outside of a reading, it might have gone differently. But nevertheless,
Yeah.
it's still very impactful.
Oh yeah. Um, maybe you'll have a different answer, I think, but for the next two, I might combine, but like maybe people you haven't collaborated with, but what other composers or musicians have been really inspirational for your journey, again, impacting your style? And then I think, you know, for someone who's doing so much in many genres and avenues, whether it's in film or just specifically for musicians, all really all the things that you do, but you know, kind of thinking about these composers and musicians from afar, you know, who do you also listen to just when you have the chance?
And I have the chance. Yeah, it's honestly like I think from like writing so much music and transcribing so much music, the time I spend listening to music for leisure has gone down like a lot, which is kind of unfortunate, but also like I don't know, I enjoy silence sometimes.
Yeah.
It's a nice balance. But I mean, some artists that I've gotten into, I think the most recent artist that I've been obsessed with has been I don't know if you've heard Little Sims. She's like a UK based rapper.
Yeah.
She's very what's the word where you just like write a lot of stuff throughout your life? Prolific. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very prolific, uses a lot of like honestly like a lot of like orchestral textures, which is really interesting. But just really love her creativity and like her flow and that kind of stuff. I think earlier on, like some artists I really like listening to, there's like Christian Scott, Atunde Ajua, or I think as he now goes by, he's a trumpeter. I don't know if you're familiar with this flute player. Her name's, I think, Alenda Pinderhughes. That sounds familiar. But he performs with this flute player that she's worth checking out. It's they do kind of like a just a really cool kind of jazz thing. I don't really know how to describe it otherwise. But in terms of like more like I don't know, composers back in the day, I think especially through like my flute sonata, for example, like a big influence on a lot of like the harmonic kind of writing and stuff was Maurice Ravel was a
Okay.
big one. I
Yeah.
think also there's just something of like when I was in like classical music school, I feel like French music, one I thought was very beautiful, but also I am part French. So that was like a thing that I could kind of like grasp onto be like, okay, I exist in this world. Like here's what I can, here's how I can like really connect with it. Um, then other composers, like I was really into like Steve Reich, a lot of like the very like minimalist kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, there's other kind of like genre benders that I was really into as well. Like there's this band called the Punch Brothers. There's a mandolin player. So it's like they're kind of like a bluegrass,
Oh, cool.
classical chamber thing, just kind of like an entity that do these songs that have this instrumentation of like you have a fiddle and you have a mandolin and a banjo and a bass and a guitar, but the music is just like one of the pieces I heard them perform live was like they perform like a Debussy piece
Okay.
and they just do really cool stuff that was very formative for me like early in college, I think, just in terms of like seeing certain instrumentations, but them not really following the conventions of what you would expect them to play.
Yeah.
Kind of just opened my mind to really all the possibilities you can do with that kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, I had a feeling we were aligned because like French music, at least all the flute French music, like
Oh, for sure.
I want to say I'm a very positive and happy person, but I personally think, and there's so many other, nationalities and genres and all of that that can convey this too, but something about French was always got really deep and dark, and I always
Mm.
loved the tones and the emotions that come from all of that.
No, for real, for real. I think there's something about like I don't know. Are you specifically like does like French Impressionism come to mind, especially, or like what any composers who write for flute, like French composers for flute, you that come to mind?
Yeah, I feel like I mean, and it, not, I except the one piece. I mean, he's written more, but the one piece that comes to mind. But Debussy, um, I'm trying to think. We have maybe you've seen it. It's our blue. It probably could be other colors too, but it's a blue, like the book of French songs. But like
Mm.
there's Chaminade and there's what is it? I think Dutu and hopefully people who are flute people. The names are always the worst for me, but
It's
I
okay.
French pieces in general have always like made a lasting impression for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Something about it. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I went to France and I went to like
Okay.
Debussy Museum and stuff like that. I wanted to go to Ravel's house too, but we weren't able to just make it work. But yeah, I know there's something I really dig about like Impressionism. And I don't know if it's like, I mean, they didn't want to be called Impressionist composers, but like something about like the ways in which music is similar to like visual art styles is really cool, I think. And so I think there's something about that that I really appreciated. I really like thinking about even if I might not like the labels people might attribute to it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Same page, so I'm glad to hear.
Mhm.
I might save the next question for last about some
Okay.
recognition stuff because I feel like that could be a nice closer-ish too. But um, I want to move in. I know from reading your bio that like nature has a big impact on you, I think, even
Hmm.
not stalking, but looking at Instagram, your bio, seeing nature. And so was just kind of curious about like what is your relationship between location and sound and how does it impact your pieces? And even thinking about, you know, in your head of like where you want this to be performed, whether it's the concert hall, a church, outside, how does that impact everything for you?
That's a really good question. I think I've definitely like performed in multiple spaces in terms of like really big like reverb y like halls, like big like cathedrals or churches. I've never written a piece for that kind of space, but I have performed pieces that like are written for that kind of space within that space. So kind of like the old like Gregorian chant style thing. I used to also sing like some barbershop quartet music, and there's a big focus on like just like very pure intervals and like ringing chords and matching vowels in a way that just makes it so much like bigger and expansive.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of spatial influence, along with the way that the music is designed, hasn't influenced my concert music much at this point, but has influenced like a lot of my more production side of like writing stuff on like my computer, like film score music, like having just very like I kind of like to close my eyes and just imagine the space that I'm creating with my like reverb plugins, like
Yeah.
really big, just I really love really big, slow moving pads and like huge reverb and just kind of like living in the space of the sound of a chord for a while. I think I've also been getting really into ambient music recently, so that might be part of it. But it is really cool how the vibe of different places and locations impact like the music that is being performed. Like when I was traveling this last summer, I went to Kenya and I was going all around the country, but at the end I was visiting like where my family's from. They're from like a pretty forested area in Western Kenya. And so we visited this huge rainforest that used to be connected to the Congo rainforest before there was all this stuff with farming and whatever. And so we were in the forest, and I was thinking, I was like, this would be like a really, really dope like concert venue, just like among the trees. Could do some kind of like experimental, like, I don't know, like bring in some instruments and some delay pedals and do some kind of like really artsy live performance. I think in addition to like nature as a space for performance, I think just connecting with nature, just witnessing it is also a big influence in my own compositional process. Like I've been really into hiking for a while, and I've also recently started getting into like gardening and stuff like that.
I love that.
And it's interesting seeing like it's always very rewarding just to see any new growth on like a plant that I am taking care of. But
Same.
there's also something to witness about like how much of the plant's like DNA is so evident in how it looks and how it grows and that whole kind of thing. And seeing and also witnessing the ways in which people like look at nature and replicate it within their own like within architecture or design, like how planes are made to look like birds, or how like a whole TED talk I saw about like African villages and how a lot of them are based on fractal design, and how that fractal design is something that they see from the ways in which different plants grow. And
Okay.
I thought that was so cool. Like they're literally designing like the ways in which people live based off of like leaves and branches and stuff like that. And so I feel like just witnessing all of that and seeing how these things interact with each other definitely influences my own musical style. Like in terms of what I was saying with like the DNA of like music, I think that also goes back to the idea of like not needing too many ideas within a piece of music,
Yeah.
is to really just explore one idea and have that influence like every aspect of itself and being that self-referential and that kind of thing. Um, yeah.
No, I love all that. It's kind of like nature is omnipresent. And so
Hmm.
using it to your, yeah, just it's 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 there. So how to evoke it in some sort of way.
Hmm. Yeah. No, totally.
Well, I feel like you answered a lot of my questions in that one. So I am excited, selfishly, to kind of talk a little bit about the piece in particular. But again, your sonata for flute and piano, as I saw, really holds a special place in your heart, being composed during a challenging time in 2016. And so, not evoking any like uh, um, sadness or anything like that, but like to what you would like to share with myself and anyone who will listen. Could you share some of the insight into that inspiration? Like, what were the ideas that you wanted to convey during it, and any unique elements or challenges that you incorporated within the composition?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. A lot of the influence of the piece, like we were talking about, a lot of it came from kind of like French musical traditions. I think there's something of, and this goes back to the whole like knowing who you're writing for thing. The
Yeah.
person who asked me to write the flute sonata, his name is Devin. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I think he says it Jacques, but you could also say Jacques. He's now the flutist with the Knoxville Symphony. And so he was going to UCLA at the same time. One of the flutists. I don't know what his chair is, but one of the things I was trying to evoke within the piece and kind of like match was his just like general vibe and energy as a person. And so there are certain moments, like in the third movement. So he's just kind of like a very, one, he was just like a very technically amazing flutist. So it was
Yeah.
a similar thing to when I was talking to Alex Newell. I was like, so what can you like do? What are you? He's like, I can do anything. Just like give me a challenge. Like I want it. Like I want it bad. And I was like, okay. So it's a lot of the technical, like a lot of the flourishes and stuff like that in the third movement, especially certain gestures. Like he was a very kind of also like silly and sassy person. And I
Okay.
feel like I wanted to have some of those elements incorporated in some kind of way as well. So I think first and foremost, I kind of wanted to match his energy and his taste in order to have kind of like a successful performance, but also just like as a cool way to collaborate. I think. So wait, remind me what the question was before
No,
I go off much of
you're
a tangent.
you're spitting great things to me, but just kind of like, it was composed during a challenging time, and so just any insights on inspiration, ideas you want to convey in the music, and any of elements of challenge you incorporated within.
Yeah, I mean, I think on like the darker side of things, in terms of like the challenges and what 2016 meant for a lot of people and what it meant for me in particular, um, like I feel like a lot of people weren't having like a great time in 2016. For its time, 2016 feels like a pretty fairly morbid time. I think there are a lot of like famous celebrity deaths, and we had the election of Donald Trump and just a lot of stuff that felt like it was just kind of going south.
Yeah.
So there was like that kind of whole backdrop in general. But I think in terms of my own like personal life, around the time I was writing this piece, I had a couple instances. One of my close friends had like a near death experience, and another one of my friends, his dad got diagnosed with cancer and died that same year. And so, and I don't talk about this too much, but I feel like I might as well. So for the second movement, and so there's like a line I try to tread too between trying to like, I don't want to like romanticize the trauma and like the suffering of it, but it's also important to be honest and acknowledge like the ways in which I was able to use music like as an emotional outlet for some of these things.
Yeah.
So the piano accompaniment so I was just like improvising in my piano teacher's studio one day, coming up with ideas for the flute sonata. So I get a text from my friend about his dad that he got diagnosed with cancer. And I think it was just like the space I was in of creating music at the time. And I went to see him like later that day, but I came up with the accompaniment for that second movement like right after hearing that news.
Okay.
And then, so that was kind of the basis for it. And then a couple months later, I had another friend who had like a near death experience. And a day after that, I wrote like the entirety of the second movement. I don't know what it was. I just had like a lot of like pent up stuff inside that just needed to be like released all at once.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. I think like the pandemic has not done that for me as much. I think I have like one piano piece that I kind of wrote that I haven't done much with, but I think at that time, like using that kind of sadness and suffering and being able to turn it into something was something I was doing a little bit more of. So there's that aspect in the second movement. In terms of yeah, in terms of other creative challenges, I think just like writing something that big. Like I'd never written a piece that was like that long before.
Okay.
So that was kind of interesting, being able to like make sure that the whole piece has its own DNA, even though each movement has its own kind of vibe as well, and how that develops was an interesting challenge. Like I didn't write the movements in order, for example. Like
Okay.
the second movement came first, and then I wrote the first movement, and then I wrote the third movement.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah. So those are some things.
Yeah, no. Well, first, I appreciate the vulnerability and trust there. The second movement is gorgeous, and
Thank you.
it's interesting too. It's like, in the beginning it says gloomy, but it's
Mhm.
like gorgeous at the same time. So it's one of the
Mm.
kind of Frenchisms, I guess, that we've been talking
Yeah.
about, like gorgeous, but has like, those undertones. And
Mm.
um, no, I appreciate that. I
Yeah, for
think
sure.
we don't always get the opportunity to hear that, especially when we play pieces that are by dead, passed away composers. And so, no, I thank you.
Sure. Yeah. It's one of those things I'm like, do I put this in the program notes? Do I want people to like know about this as they're hearing it? Or what's how much of my own experience do I want people to know before they listen to it? It's an interesting little mind struggle there in itself.
The balance. You let me know what you decide on if you as you continue to do program notes.
For sure.
What do you want audience? What do you want the audience to take away when they listen to the piece, whether it's on the YouTube recording or it's live? Like, yeah, what do you want them to take away?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I feel like a lot of the composing process and part of what I like about it so much is being able to have total control over everything.
Yeah.
And then as each step goes on from giving it to the performer, that's one sense of kind of releasing control over it. You're going, I trust you to be able to either do this in dialogue with me or to be able to take your own kind of spin on it. But then there's once the performer gives it to the audience, how much control do I want to have over how they feel? And so, kind of what I was touching on earlier about like, I don't know exactly. I actually don't remember. Are there program notes on Rising Tide for this piece, or is it just kind of like work composed in 2016,
I think
11 minutes long? Like,
there's like a little blur, but like I think
yeah,
you get the piece.
for sure. Okay. Yeah. So it's one of those things where Um, and what's cool, I guess, about doing these things online is you can continually update like what the program notes would be.
Yeah.
And so I think when I first wrote the piece, if we're specifically talking about the flute sonata, like I didn't really want to put in all those things I was just talking about because they were very fresh and like,
Yeah.
the people that were kind of involved in those situations were people that I was like hanging out with regularly and didn't really talk to them about it too much either because it was just very fresh and sensitive and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think what I more just wanted to have happen is people to congratulate me on my work and, just tell me that they liked it. So I just kind of left it very open, just kind of like you tell me what you like about this piece. I've never worked on anything I've never worked this hard on like anything before. So I was just really excited to hear how people were receptive to it. And so that was what happened at first. We premiered it at UCLA, we had a composer's concert. But now something that I didn't really think about at the time, because like I'd only premiered like one or two pieces otherwise in that kind of format, was that like, especially with the internet and all these like, rising tide and stuff like that, is that the piece begins to take on a life of its own. Like, people will find it like either algorithmically or through their own like careful research. And so more people begin to start talking about the piece. And I get YouTube comments occasionally. And that kind of thing. So it's interesting to hear people's takes. And I feel like nowadays I'm starting to get a little like initially a comment like, oh, this piece is so beautiful is something that like was just like exactly what I wanted to hear and extremely impactful, I think. But I think nowadays hearing the same thing, it's not really about the reward of hearing the feedback, but I think having some program notes talking a little bit more about my process and what was going through my mind at the time, I think allows to have like a more enhanced experience of the piece. And I think can kind of invite more of like a dialogue about that thing. Like, and I think that that's something really valuable that I don't really think I was comfortable doing before. I don't know if I touched on this earlier, but I feel like one of the reasons that music also really took over in my life was that I was like a very like quiet kid and I didn't really like expressing myself with words very much. And so I felt like music was a way that I could express myself using sound in like a non-verbal kind of way. And so I feel like that discomfort with expressing my words kind of transferred over to this kind of like program notes kind of thing. And now as I get more comfortable with like talking about myself and my work and my process and seeing the value in that, I think inviting those kinds of discussions is really really valuable and something that I want to be doing more. So I don't know exactly what I want people to feel, but I think I could take more of an active role in guiding people to see something through a certain framework.
Yeah, no, well said. And I I often spend some maybe hours, I don't want to like think about the time, but on TikTok, and one of
Nice.
them said like, you know, you it's the time to be seen. And I think again, we talked a little bit earlier, is like it can be really vulnerable. And I saying to the both of us, like, I hope as we grow into ourselves, like letting us shine. And also, too, I'm hoping as I record next week that I do the piece justice, but nice to hear at the same time, taking the spin and having our own interpretations is also welcome.
Yeah, no, I think that's what's beautiful about having like multiple people perform it. Yeah, everyone brings their own kind of thing to it. And that's what's been so interesting, like online, is hearing people like purchase my piece and then they'll just email me like, "Hey, I performed your piece." I'm like, "Who are you? Thank you." Oh my God. Like, and yeah, it's always just such a cool surprise to be able to hear how people relate to these rhythms and these ideas and what kinds of things they want to accentuate and what that says about them. And the fact that they all like my music, but maybe they like different things about it. And like it's cool to be able to um, see different aspects of it come out that way too. So
No, no, it all yes. All I can say is all I can just shake my head and agree. And um I these last three questions, and I know like I appreciate all the time, and hopefully I feel a lot of joy and warmth right now. So again, even the privilege to have this dialogue, which doesn't always happen, and
mhm.
so very appreciative. And so with these last ones, hopefully um short and sweet, but also want to hear, excited to hear what you say, more so about the field and next steps. And so, you know, I can only speak for myself that I feel like I'm in a position of trying to figure out how to affect the classical music world, whether it's the things I play, the groups that I play with, um, how I advocate for the genre itself, even mixing and bending genres and art forms and all of that. And so for yourself, like, how do you see the what how do you see the future of classical music evolving, and what is your role in shaping that direction?
That's a very good question. I think I do feel like when I try to like perceive the world of classical music, I do feel like there's like a lot of responsibility that can be taken, and then I feel like is also sort of put on like composers, not from like composers of POC, queer, like women composers, to really be doing a lot of the work in like moving things forward. I think the way that I like to think about it is to just be focused on making music that like connects with people. I think as long as I'm doing that, um, I'll be moving classical music forward, I guess. So like an example is like a big influence for one of the movements of my like sonata for bass trombone and piano was I brought in kind of like a lot of influence from like video game music that I had listened to growing up. Um, and that's not something like video games didn't exist when a lot of these composers that are very, very highly regarded in this kind of repertoire.
Yeah.
And so I feel like this is something that very specifically connects to classical musicians who are like, I don't know, like under 40, I would say. Like I've discovered through my own just kind of like the spaces that I've been in is there are quite a few musicians, like black male jazz musicians who are LA transplants who are like really into video games and anime when they were kids.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's such like a specific thing, I feel like. But I'm realizing like no, it's not at the same time. And it's just really cool to see like how other people take those influences and put it into their own thing. And then suddenly we're like all part of unintentionally, we're just doing stuff that kind of resonates with like how we were raised. And that way it's able to, that kind of connection is able to be made. So I feel like social media plays a big role in this too, and being able to just find and meet people who you feel like you can connect with. And if they do make music in some kind of way, just being able to make more of those connections. And I think the power of being able to make music that people connect with is also just like feeling that they have more of a place within like the classical realm. Um, so yeah, I don't think too much about like, I try not to think too much about like classical music as this like big, like unmoving entity that like we have to do something about and that it's like dying and all this stuff. I think I'm just more concerned about like just making cool music and sharing it with people and hoping for the best. Yeah.
I feel that. Um, that one grew up watching Naruto, loved video games, playing Breath of the Wild, or Tears of the Kingdom. Um,
Oh, I haven't played that one yet. My girlfriend's like obsessed with it though.
so it's good. And even like, we talked about simplicity. That's one of example of simplicity in the score. And also like, I've jammed and I don't know if Joe Hisashi, like all of a sudden I'm getting like Spirit Away and my improv. And it's like you what you said is really cool. The like, all the things how we've grown and the influences on us, they just can pop up.
Hmm. And like with the internet and like, I don't know, all this globalization, I feel like everyone's just taken, like everyone's doing the stuff where they're taking like, I just saw something on my TikTok feed the other day, or maybe it was like a YouTube short or something. Someone took like the Spirited Away theme and like made like a funk version of it for one of their concerts.
Yeah.
Like, perfect. People are gonna love that. Like, that's awesome. Like I know so many people who would be into that kind of thing. And there's all this like Studio Ghibli jazz, and there's the whole dialogue. I mean, there's a whole conversation about like dialogue between like Japanese composers and jazz, whether that be through like video game music or like anime or just like playing jazz in general. Um, so yeah, no, it's cool to see the ways in which people influence we influence people over there, they influence us back, and it's just like this constant web and dialogue, and it's yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Agreed. Um, well, my last one's more of a shout out, but this one question, as your success as a Black composer or any other identity, multiracial, multicultural, any of the identities you want to uplift here, but is inspiring and it's important, especially even for me, in towards of representation in the music world. And so, again, not a big question, but also take it with a grain of sand too, of like, how do you see your role in promoting diversity, inclusion, representation within the classical music industry or film industry? And what advice might you have for aspiring Black or any, again, of your identities, composers and musicians who are also looking to make their mark in the industry?
Totally. I think I've seen a lot of like good examples of how these things can be done. One thing that's been helpful for me, just in terms of ways people have helped me out, is honestly a lot of these like lists that have come out, like especially posts like George Floyd, people being like, oh, we got to do better. Like I requested to be on a lot of these lists of like Black composers, and I was amazed to find out so many people who were like, yeah, let me like, there's some guy who emailed me. He's like, I want to buy 7 copies of your piece to send out to people. And I was like, this is awesome. And creating spaces in order for people to have a space to express themselves, like within a certain identity, is like really important. So, like, for example, like a couple examples of like spaces that I've been in recently that just like feel very uplifting are like this composer mentor I have. His name is Marcus Norris. He
Okay.
built this orchestra called the South Side Symphony.
Okay.
And so it's a group, it's primarily like Black folks. Kind of the one of the iterations we had of it was at this like gala where there was it was like a Black theater company and they had like a whole Harlem Renaissance theme. So they asked us to find a bunch of Black musicians to make an all Black orchestra. And
Okay.
so that's kind of where we were just like, all right, we're on a hunt for every Black violin player in LA. Cause like there really aren't like that many. And so it's been interesting now that we know so many cool Black musicians and get them together for these concerts. It's not exclusively Black in that sense, but just being in that space, making like kind of orchestral jazz influenced. They do a lot of like covers of like 90s R&B, but there's also like some originals by the composer Marcus. And just being in a space where people can really just do their stuff and are like celebrated and can make noise like that is really interesting. Because like another example I have, because like you just never really see that kind of thing. Like growing up in like Marcus, for example, he was the only in our department of 40 composers at UCLA. He was the only other like Black person in the department, like my entire time there.
Yeah.
And in the classical music department in general, there's like one or two maybe per like year.
Yeah.
And also like growing up, I went to school, like high school in like a very it wasn't the neighborhood I grew up in, but it was the neighborhood I went to school in. It was like a very white, like affluent neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so it's not until like very recently that I've been in musical spaces where there just are so many people of like African descent.
Yeah.
And like there's a jazz jam I went to in this like historically Black neighborhood called Lamert Park. And it's where like the big LA like Juneteenth celebration happens and that kind of stuff. And just being in that kind of space playing jazz, not within like an educational, like formal institutional setting was just really interesting. I was like, it just felt very, very, very different, I think, from how like the kind of institutions of like higher education can feel.
Yeah.
And so I think just having those kinds of like community musical spaces have been really impactful and motivating for me to just feel encouraged and feel like I have a place. making music and doing that kind of thing. I think in terms of just encouraging people and uplifting people, I think any amount of like mentorship you can get from people, or like once you get into a place where you have any sort of power to be able to uplift people either by like buying their sheet music or sharing, just using your social media platform. That's something I'm trying to get better at, is just like publicly praising other people. It's something I'm working through right now, but I really want to be like the kind of person that's just always like, and you do this a lot too. You share like videos like all the time on like your Instagram story, like, look at this cool stuff that's happening. Look at what these cool people are doing. And I think there's a lot of power in like getting some things to people's like attention. And so I think like aside from just like putting your money towards these things, like whether or not you have money to be able to put towards these things, like being able to share these things and having conversations about them and doing what you can to make people just aware is also really powerful as well. So I think just like helping each other out is really the like the crux of it.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well said. Thank you.
sure.
Well, I um really, I know we went over than what we said, but I just really want to say a big thank you, gratitude, appreciation, just because, again, I've never had this opportunity before. I have played some living composers, but never got to talk to them. Most of them are dead. Not a lot like the representational piece. So it's, you have definitely checked a lot of first times for me, and that feels so good, especially for the thing that I'm doing and trying to advocate for, even just in the flute world. And so um, I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for us. I'm hoping to shine, us to shine, and looking forward to playing the piece. And again, and when I send you the recording and the copy, looking forward to your thoughts. And yeah, I feel like the universe has aligned in many ways. You've been receptive. I found you. Research is power, so we know that it's there. But before we say goodbye to everyone and ourselves, but hopefully so long. Hopefully we can keep each other in our networks. But just want to see if you had any artists, composers, musicians that you want to recommend to anyone, or any resources, or anything last minute like shout outs you just want to say to me and anyone who's listening.
Any shout outs. I mean, I think composers to check out, like I've mentioned him a few times, but the composer that who's my mentor, Marcus Norris, is just doing really cool things. I think he's inspired me a lot, especially as a Black composer, and kind of like he really embodies like knowing your musicians, having your kind of squad of people who, you know, just love spending time with you and love making music and understanding like where you're coming from and how important that is for just the quality of art and your quality of life and that kind of thing. Um, and because of that, I mean, we're coming out with a couple albums like later this year, I think. And it's just going to be really cool. So that kind of thing inspires me to want to do the that own thing myself. So yeah, I would say Marcus Norris is a cool guy. In terms of resources or anything like that, I think like for composers, I would say just like the internet is awesome.
Yeah.
Like so much of my music education has happened in the library at UCLA, looking at YouTube video music essays. Um, and just like tutorials for stuff, and so much stuff that like was not being taught in the institutions. I think there's so much like good stuff and skills to be learned like for free, and it's just good to be able to recognize what kinds of boundaries like aren't in place, like working what kinds of ways you can get access to be able to improve your craft and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I got.
And that's all, that's enough. So thank you so much for all your time. And
Thank you.
Looking forward to the recording. Some anxiousness, but I'm really looking forward to putting it out there with the world.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. Congratulations on getting this opportunity to be able to do this recording with the ITF and all that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.